Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 191 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, Emerson, and joining me, we have my co host, Anomaly.
Hello.
And this week, Fyr'alath is dead for good. We're both done with Prague, and woo, it's over. We also have more MDI stuff, including we want to take some time to talk over the details of the portal strat that Echo used on the
It's
Murazon's
so
Rise
cool.
dungeon. It's so cool, yeah. And then we're gonna talk some about I don't know what's it called, Prague
Yeah,
stuff.
like Prague strategies, we'll say, like how you approach
Yeah,
progression, particularly in a boss, and like pull speed and
yeah,
discussion and stuff like that. So
yeah. And then there's just grab bag of other news. Some of you will remember that Warlock blog post from the old Warlock designer that left a while back that they were going through the redesign from Mists. It was posted 5 years ago.
the
The last
first
part of
one.
it's finally out.
Yes, Xelnath finally finished that epic block.
Um, and I mean, I've not finished reading that post, but from what I have read, it is a worthy finale to that series. So,
Oh yeah.
good, good. But yeah, where do we want to start this week? Do we want to start with MDI?
Yeah, we can start with MDI. 'Cause I think we talk about your progression, how you finish off the boss with
We'll,
with
we'll talk Prague stuff along with
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so MDI continues this week. It is Group B. They're going on right now. If you're listening to this live or listen to this on Monday, it happened over the weekend. Currently, Perplexed, I think, is just crushing in Group B, with a hodgepodge of other teams sort of vying really for the second place coming out of this. Um, but yeah, no, I think the biggest thing actually happened after the podcast last week. So MDI has been MDI, not a ton of real large innovation, except from a little guild by the name of Echo, pulled off probably one of the most creative strategies in a while, I'll say. I mean, I think MDI for the most part has been known for, it was in BFA when it started, it was all about what you can snap where. So it's basically snapping was the big thing. Moved on to, I think snapping continued to be a part of it, but then moved on to like, okay, how can you route things? Like what's the biggest pulls you can do? How much trash can you pull into a boss? Because that was always a time save, things like that. But then this sort of MDI, with is it Rise that has the
Murazon's
portal
Rise,
piece?
yeah.
Yeah. Within Rise, Echo pulled off probably one of the craziest strats I think I've ever seen. So to give you a little bit of a background here on the actual tech, so in Rise, after the first boss, as you go to split to Morchi or to Battlefield, there is an area in the middle that has these sort of time wardens, and when you kill a warden, it links you. It drops a portal, and that portal links to the previous portal that may have dropped. So it's a easy way to move around the area. And we thought that was it. That sort of just made it quicker to move around that small area. What Echo found was you could actually move those time wardens to other areas of the dungeon, and basically the portals still worked the same way they did if they were all in the same room. So you could still potentially teleport fairly long distances. So what Echo did, and there's actually a really good video by it's actually up on the Warcraft YouTube, but it's narrated by Dratnos that goes over this. But essentially, what Echo did was utilizing a combination of shadow melds to drop combat and snaps to basically snap mobs to specific players. They essentially were able to place portals between the battlefield and Morchi's arena, which allowed them to kill essentially battlefield and instantly port to Morchi and then kill Morchi and move on to the dungeon. Which is I think absolutely wild. Like
Yeah.
just some crazy tech there.
So the way that it worked in total is they got one of the portal keepers from the main room low. Then um they sent Zalia ahead to Morchi's room. They stealth past the ads there, and they're just in the encounter area for Morchi. However you say it. How are you supposed to say that?
I think it's Morchi. Also,
Morchi.
Zalia did stealth because Zalia was in combat when he lands, so
Oh,
he
you're
has
right.
to he has to use whatever the feral jump is to jump past that
Okay. Yeah,
trash,
yeah, yeah.
which is even more crazy.
But then they start spamming regrowth on themselves in order to generate threat because healing generates threat. Now Shadow Melds playing Night Elf Demon Hunter. They Shadow Meld, and the low HP Portal Keeper. The changes they made to snapping after BFA mean that basically snapping takes time. They don't teleport immediately, but they will eventually.
Hmm.
So it teleports to Xelia. Xelia kills it with Iridol, which is this caster weapon, if you're not familiar, that does a very large amount of damage to a single target when they are in execute range. And they finish it off using that. That drops a portal in Morchi's room.
Hmm.
Now, while this is going on, is getting a summon from the Warlock in the group in the battlefield room.
Yep.
And basically throws a glaive while they take the summon.
Oh, he didn't use throw glaive. He
Didn't
used
use throw glaive.
he
Oh,
used
sigil,
the
sigil,
AoE
sigil of
yeah,
flame,
sigil, yeah.
sigil of flame.
Yeah.
Same principle. You use
Yeah.
something that is going to do damage after he moves, but hasn't put him in combat yet, so he can still take the summon.
Yep.
Sigil is a better play. That's way easier.
Yeah.
And then that second portal keeper snaps to now. And they kill that in battlefield while they're doing the tank. And then Xelia can port across and heal. Actually, they might have also summoned Xelia. I didn't pay attention to that part because honestly,
Yeah.
that's not the cool part. But what they're left with is a portal between the battlefield room and Morchi's room. It's just wild. And then they are immediately like the tank dies in the battlefield room. The next set of trash spawns, and they snap it onto Morchi using the
Yep.
portal. So they're like, not only are they skipping all the transit time between those things, they're also doing extra trash. Like
Yep.
they're making the trash more efficient at the same time. It's crazy.
Oh
It's
yeah, I
so
forgot
cool.
they take the three mobs before the
Yeah,
final boss spawns over to Morchi, kill Morchi and those three mobs, and then go back and kill the final boss of Battlefield.
yeah,
Yeah, that like the efficiency there is absolutely wild. Like
yeah.
I wish because I actually watched this live, and I think the funny thing is like the
Casters were so
casters
confused.
did not have any idea what's going on. And I think the live broadcast missed out on like how cool this was. It was nice that Warcraft, like
They
the
did come
basically the
back
main work,
later
yeah,
and talk
went
about
back
it.
and basically had Dratnos, like well, Dratnos talked about it, and then also they put out that video that actually describes in detail
Yeah,
exactly how
yeah,
all
yeah.
this sort of tech worked. But yeah, it was wild watching it.
That video,
Watching
by
it
the way,
live.
will be linked in the show notes. I pulled it up on stream if you're watching the video version, saw clips of it. But if you want to watch the whole thing with Dratton's much clearer explanation, you can use that to the
Yeah.
show notes.
Yeah, but it's a cool idea of using like Shadow Meld to drop aggro, using healing aggro, using the snap tech, using like delayed abilities and summons in instances,
Yeah,
right? Like so it's yeah, it was a really cool skip. And some of the yeah, like I think the video on Warcraft's YouTube channel is like the most innovative MDI strat or something, or most creative strategy in MDI history is like the name of it. And I think right now that hands down is one of the most creative
like
strats we've seen.
I think
So
the only thing that competes with it is the Angry Toast snapping. Like the first time we really saw
yeah.
snapping was in Atal Dazar by Angry Toast, where they were the ones that pioneered doing the leaps onto the where the torches are
Yep.
and having all the stuff snap to the tank there using misdirects and things like that to prevent things from leaping. And that's that's the only thing that's comparable, really.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think everything else has just been a like how big can we pull something or like how can we pull things like I mentioned how much can we pull into a boss or how can we get this into the boss and damage it there. But yeah, no, it's super interesting. So we'll see a lot more of it, I think, moving forward. I think it's funny. I think Echo had tried to skip Rise, like not play Rise for the longest
They've been
time.
banning
Like,
it, yeah.
yeah. Just ended up not doing it for this one. So um, but cool, yeah, that's the fun MDI stuff the biggest MDI stuff that I think happened. But yeah, Echo eventually just to sort of close out, they won Group A, came
Yeah.
back through losers.
They lost to another team, which we talked about last week, but they lost to
Yeah,
another team in the upper bracket, came back through the losers bracket, and this map that they played the Merzon's Rise on, or the set that they played Merzon's Rise on, was one of the last ones that they did. And
yeah,
they absolutely destroyed with it.
dude, crushed. Actually, that's it. I want to see what was their time.
It was
Yeah, like
insane. Like
their
12
time was
minutes.
17-10, and the other team didn't even finish.
Yeah.
Like they were basically having, they had both bosses, Morchi and Battlefield, dead. Uh, before, like, yeah, the other team had even, actually they just had one of the two dead. So yeah, they were
Yeah.
well ahead
Yeah.
with that tech. So no, it was cool. It was an interesting way to play that dungeon. So um well, cool. I think the only, I guess, sort of moving maybe slightly forward here. Like you mentioned, they finished our Xelnath, also known as Alexander Brazy, finished off sort of his three-part series of the Warlock redesign going into Cataclysm, or sorry, going into Mists of Pandaria. And so if you're not familiar, Xelnath, he has a blog out there that sort of goes over a bunch of postmortems from a design perspective. Like his Shade of Iran three-part series on like designing Shade of Iran is really interesting. If you care about that. But he did finish off this big one, which was he was in charge of the Warlock redesign going into MOP. And the interesting part about this is he comes at it from a a way that Blizzard has traditionally, I don't think they've ever really done it to this extent. I think they've tried, but he basically got like 4 or 5, I don't know how many it ended up being, but he got a number of actually players, sort of very, we'll say like integral players in the community, the Warlock community, very vocal ones, right? To basically be his sounding board. So he started like an email thread with them, I think it was, and essentially was like, look, I'm gonna bring you on the design process, show you what my thinking is before actually doing it. The only thing is you can't tell anybody. Like just
Yeah.
don't tell anybody we're doing this. And then you can talk about it once this goes live, once it's fully announced. But like while we're designing it, try and not say anything. The funny thing is those players never did say anything. Like it came out definitely after the fact, right? But while they went through this whole sort of MOP alpha and beta design phase with the Warlock class, like um, sort of kept their mouth shut. And it's honestly, I think to this day, this redesign is considered one of the best redesigns of any class.
Yeah.
Um, regardless of what you think, it's sort of Warlocks leaving Cataclysm were sort of not in the best position. They sort of were basically
A
three of the
mess.
same thing. They were like the same thing. I think he gives into some detail about this, but yeah, from what I remember personally, it was like Destro was the dot spec, and like Affliction was like Destro. It was just
Yeah.
like there wasn't a lot of like identity for each of them. So Destro needed a redesign, and I think this was one of the greatest, probably the best redesign in the history of WoW.
Yeah.
And sort of was able to leverage the community for it, which in a way that I don't think Blizzard has ever done since. I think they've tried this. I don't think it's ever worked as well as it did in this specific case. And I don't know if that's like the way Alex or Alexander, I don't know if he goes by Alexander or Alex, but I'll call him Xelnath. The way like Xelnath presented it to the players and like his own ability to like convey the ideas, or just like the players he worked with were like very much like cared more, like not cared more, but like we're very in tune with like this is what we want out of the class that
Yeah.
doesn't make it overpowered, doesn't make it like a ridiculous type
Well,
class. Well,
it
yeah, I
was a
guess
little
since
bit
then.
overpowered in MOP.
Yeah, that's true. I guess they were really good mop. But no, it went, I mean, it went really well. So yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. Long story short, he finishes off the blog post, the blog, I guess, chain of posts
Yeah.
with part 3. And it's like this whole wrap up. So
Yeah. And I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind as well, so kind of pre-Cataclysm, your talent trees were very flexible. You could kind of do whatever. You could go, a third into each or all into one. There was a
mhm.
lot of flexibility, and so there wasn't so much spec identity. Like when you hear some of the old designers talk about like, oh, we didn't like the talents that, you got 1% extra hit. It's a lot of what the talent trees were. 1% extra hit is not spec identity. It's just like player power, right?
Yeah.
So there wasn't really this same level of separation between the specs to the point that they would have their own identities. That started to change with Cataclysm, where they switched to the model where, like, when you hit level 10, you picked a spec first, and it
Mhm.
gave you this ability for your spec that your spec was going to maybe not be built around, but it was going to be important, right? Like Marksmanship Hunter got aimed shot, that
Mhm.
kind of deal. And I don't remember what Warlocks got. They were definitely not one of the classes that had like a clear identity for each of their specs, like you were saying. So I
Yeah.
think one of the reasons the Warlock redesign might have been as successful as it was is because there was so much room for them to improve.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it gave them a direction where they didn't have one. So yeah, I think that's part of it too. They were in such a bad position previous to that.
Yeah.
But I think still, I mean, I think even still, like the way that the redesign went, like the way that MOP Warlock played, I think people will say that's one of
Oh
the
yeah.
best playing classes. Like
Absolutely.
regardless of how bad they were beforehand, like they came out in a
It's
very good spot in MOP.
that, and like people really liked Marksmanship Hunter and HFC is the other one that I keep hearing about. But
Yeah,
like people, even people that don't play Hunter were like, that was good.
yeah. Yeah, so no, he finishes up the blog. You get to part three 5 years later.
Yeah.
Is really cool to read through. And like I said, the whole blog has a bunch of other postmortems. The Shade of Iran one, like I mentioned, is really cool. If you care about the way that like fight design goes and um how they design things at Blizzard. So it gives you a little bit of peek behind the scenes how some of the old names would interact with the designers. But yeah, I mean, it's funny as much as we talk about this, like there is the ability. I think Blizzard does this a little bit more often today, where they will take I think more directed feedback from certain members of your community. So like
Yeah.
always going to be certain players that have the ear of a designer, but I don't think it was ever to like this extent where like essentially like I think Alex went to them and was like, I'm doing a redesign and I have no idea what I'm doing. So I'm just going to give you ideas and you tell me if they're good or not. Right. Like it's a very honest approach to
Yeah.
designing where like I think Blizzard isn't that, not that they're that honest, but like I think they come in with a plan nowadays of like, this is what we want to accomplish. Let us know where we need to tweak things versus, provide wildly new ideas. So, but no, cool. It's really, really interesting, a little behind the scenes stuff. So I check out all three posts and he's got a bunch of other stuff on that blog that is cool to read through. So, um, speaking of talent redesigns, Blizzard came out with a little bit of a blue post on the Oracle hero talent tree. So if you're not familiar, Oracle, of course, is the holy priest, dispriest hero talent tree. We actually talked about this one last week or 2 weeks ago now, about the fact that
Yeah.
it centered a lot around PI, power infusion. Um, we as non-priest players, I think both of us were on the same page. Like this seems like a little much.
Yeah.
Particularly the way like the buff system worked and like keeping that all track. I think I talked a little bit about the fact that like in general playing WoW, at least as a healer, there's a lot of things to juggle and like juggling a card like system to like dish out the right card at the right time just seems
Yeah.
a little much. So Blizzard basically put a blog post that says, thanks for all the feedback. And we are going to revisit the Oracle tree. And they call out specifically its focus on replacing power infusion. So it looks like they're going to take a look at exactly what that tree is gonna do and how it interacts with power infusion. But yeah, it's I don't know. I think this is a good play because there's a as a healer, like I think every class is a lot to juggle, but I think as a healer, you have the added issue of like also like you're making in moment decisions and then
Life and
having some
death
other
in the
thing
moment
like life
decisions.
like basically like wipe or not wipe decisions, right? And so yeah, it becomes a greater focus and like having to also add on top of that like watching UI to make sure you place the right buff on another player just
Yeah.
seems like a ton of annoyance. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
good on them. Good on them to take a look at this. So I just wish they would release more talent trees because like we've gotten what like
No monk
four or
ones yet.
five, yeah, no new ones this
Soon,
week. So
soon, fingers crossed. We hope, we hope, we
I
hope.
mean alpha's starting soon, right? Alpha's in the spring, so
Yeah, we are hitting
hopefully.
March. We are about to hit
Yeah.
March. That is correct. Um, yeah. Then we've got another little touch up on the raid. Tendril is getting nerfed again. 10% more HP off him. No other mechanical changes. Oh, I guess 10% off of Tendril and off of the roots.
Yep.
This does not fix that one overlap where you still, I mean, you kind of can get away with not everybody getting rooted now. Kind of. But really, no. Like that
No.
one overlap in phase one, everybody needs freedom, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah, we've taken to in my guild. We have a couple of members of the guild that have like friends elsewhere that play the game. And so that we have a couple that are on Tindril and we're having over under bets on wipe counts.
Oh,
Like
man.
we have one of the warriors in my guild, his buddy's guild's up to 740 pulls on Tindril.
God.
And he's like all of those post nerf. Like they didn't get to Tindril until after like the big
Oh,
nerfs a
my
couple
God.
weeks ago. And it's just like
That's Tindril is Tindril is a very fun fight to play. We're gonna talk some about Prague overall
Yeah.
stuff later in the podcast. It took us more polls than I had wanted, but yeah, it's a fun fight to play. It is so punishing. The moment that you fall behind on a mechanic, you're just
Yep.
hosed. Everything is so quick. You need to be a step ahead of every single mechanic for the whole, 8 minutes of the fight or whatever, 7 minutes of the fight. And it's hard. It is hard
Yeah.
to maintain that level of play for 7 minutes.
Yeah. No, I think, yeah, we could talk about the prior side, but I think Tindril in general is one of my favorite fights in a while.
Yeah.
Even like I think even as a healer and even as like it being there's some very scary moments, I'll say, I still think it's one of the best fights they've put together in a very long
Yeah.
time.
I think it would have been better if it were missing specifically some of the toxic elements from phase one. That and this seed
Yeah.
change. They changed seed yeah, the seeds instant wiping you. Maybe a little
Yeah.
bit much.
Yeah, soaking too. I think the seeds change definitely helped. And I think having progressed both of them, the seed change definitely helped. I think doing
Yeah.
it now, having been able to experience at least the pre-nerf seeds, I'm glad I got to play that because I
Yeah.
think we would have been able to kill it without that being a change, but that change just makes that part super much easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, the phase one overlap was, yeah, that was stressful because like for me, I was not only was I escape artisting as a gnome, but I had to like tigers less somebody else, and like if I was
Yeah.
half a second early, that person
That's
dies, and
one of
there's
the
like a
things. One of the things
yeah.
we messed up. I think we'll do this differently if something like this ever happens again. We had people that could go gnome that we didn't ask them to go gnome to fix our problem with not having enough freedoms,
Mm-hmm.
and we should have just like day one been like, you should be a gnome. You
Yeah,
just need to be a gnome.
yeah, let's talk about that in like the
Yeah.
raid
Well,
thing because
yeah.
we have a guild mentality. I think that might be slightly
Yeah.
different
That'll be
about
fun to
that.
talk about.
Yeah.
But let's rapid fire some of these other ones. We got a couple of season of discovery news items, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to highlight, so this is I think my baby, love Season Discovery. Two things. Number one, Blizzard banning GDKPs seems to be working out, except if you are trading gold outside of the auction house to anyone in the game for things. So there's been a couple of we'll say Reddit posts with people out in the world basically being banned for trading gold like
Yeah.
outside of using the auction house, like whether that's to do some sort of trade out,
Yeah.
um, just between two players. So just be careful of that. But
I'm a
it's
little
it's
sus of those. Like those Reddit posts have a long
that's true.
history of getting dunked on the first time they get a GM in the comments. Like you get a blue in the comments, and they're like, "Yeah, we looked up your shit, man."
Yeah,
And
like you traded
you're
200 gold for a gray. Yeah,
yeah,
let's go.
yeah.
Um, but a
So
couple of posts like that. But it seems to be working. Like I've logged in, GDKPs literally overnight stopped being advertised. So they did a really good job cleaning
yeah,
that up. And the other thing too is Blizzard did mention, and this is something that I was wondering about, that 40 player raids in vanilla will more than likely remain 40 player raids, meaning that like Onyxia, Molten Core, Blackwing Layer, if you get that
yeah.
far, all will seemingly will be staying 40 players. So that's interesting because I will say that my friend group specifically is a 10-man type team.
Yeah,
So like if they go to 40, we will never do a 40-man raid,
yeah,
which means like at max level, potentially our season discovery journey ends right
yeah.
there.
What is likely, in my opinion, is it like maybe they released ZG earlier, right?
Yeah. Yeah. ZG or like turn like UBRS into something
Yeah,
different.
do something with
LBRS something
Ubers.
different. Yeah.
Um, and potentially also just you've got other dungeons at that level like Strat, right?
Yeah, that's true.
That
Yeah.
could get a 10-player raid version. I think that they'll keep the 40-player raids 40-player, and they will use the existing 10-player stuff like ZG. And what was the AQ one? AQ was 20, right? They might turn
Thank you,
AQ 20
Tonya.
into a 10-player raid, and then also do a couple of other like conversions to give people 10-player content to
Hmm.
keep this like 10-player raid content drip throughout the rest of season of discovery once people hit level 60, without taking away the 40-player raids that are a big part of what people like play classic, like vanilla classic 4.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hope so, because I think that's been a lot of fun. The 10-player stuff. And I think the 40-player stuff you get into, like what I do in 25 minute in Wrath Classic, which I don't talk to anybody. I just
Yeah,
go in, do my damage, and leave. Like
yeah.
it's not that
You're a
crazy.
Zerg,
So
not a raid
um
team.
exactly.
Um,
Um
we also
cool. And then,
have
oh, sorry.
tuning changes for SOD.
Yeah,
Are
I
there
mean, I
any
think
specifically you wanted to highlight?
the only one's the hunter one. So
Okay,
like, I don't know if you've seen, if you don't pay attention to season discovery, melee hunters have been
destroyed.
honestly just like yeah, like I can't think of a good parallel from a retail perspective of like a class that's just literally like head, shoulders, and probably midsection above like the rest of it. It's like you have Yao Ming as the sort of melee hunters, and you have like, a average sized human as everyone else, right? In terms of like the difference in power. So they sort of hit melee hunters pretty hard with removing the buff. So they have a rune that gives them melee specialization that increased Raptor Strike damage by 30%. They basically removed that 30%
Yeah.
increase from Raptor Strike and just made it normal damage. So that should bring those melee hunters, I think, back in line with the rest of them. But yeah, that's really the only big note. There's a bunch of other changes. I don't play any, like, I don't
Yeah.
really track
There's a
much of
couple that
SOD.
stand out to me
Okay.
from doing the tank stuff. So specifically, Shaman tank. Let's talk about Shaman tanking in Season Discovery and what counts for Shaman tanks on Warcraft logs in Season Discovery. Basically, we
Nice.
changed how the tank rules work for Nomer. We had gone with the really lax rules from original vanilla
Hmm.
in BFD, and it was a disaster. We had people that were incorrectly like you could zero tank BFD the entire thing. You didn't need a
Yeah.
tank on any boss. You can probably also do that in No More Again once you get like gear,
Hmm.
um, but it's not as free. But anyway, like because you didn't need a tank, there was a bunch of people like tanking in DPS runes and complaining about not getting a DPS parse because instead they got like a really good tank parse, but it's a tank parse and they wanted a DPS parse.
Yeah.
And then you have the tanks coming and being like, I'm an actual tank, actually tanking this with actual tank stuff on. Why am I being compared to this deadly brew rogue that has zero tanking stuff on? And so nobody's happy.
Exactly.
It was a
Yeah.
disaster. So we changed the rules. Now you have to use some like tank stuff to signify that you are trying to tank, and also kind of to keep those like deadly brew rogues out of the tank rankings and in the DPS rankings.
Hmm.
Shaman has the Way of Earth rune. Way of Earth is their tank stance kind of deal,
Yeah.
except that it competes with another really good rune, Shamanistic Rage, which no, it doesn't. Spirit of the Alpha, which is on their boots, and they just literally like didn't have a good rune for that.
Yeah.
They don't have a good rune for that period, so they put Spirit of the Alpha there, and we basically adjusted our rules so that that counts for their tank stances. If they take Spirit of the Alpha and they cast it on themselves,
Yep.
that counts for the tank stance. And I say all of that because one of the patch notes here is Spirit of the Alpha rune now grants the casting shaman 20% increased attack power if they cast the spell on a target other than themselves.
Then you kind of want to use it on someone else.
Yeah, that's not supported, by the way. We're not doing that. The
Nice.
equivalent. This is Spirit of the Alpha is kind of the equivalent of Blessing of Salvation
Hmm.
in Classic, where Blessing of Salvation is a threat reduction.
Yep.
Um, so Spirit of the Alpha is like you make one person's threat higher. The equivalent is a paladin putting Blessing of Salvation on everybody except that person. But we really are not gonna like screw around with like trying to make the equivalence of like, well, your paladin can play buff bot and just like put Blessing of Salvation. It's a 5-minute buff, by the way. Blessing of Salvation on every person except the tank in your raid every 5 minutes
Yeah.
in order
That's awful.
to have this like equivalence. It's not happening. So I'm a little bit curious if they looked at their data and they were like, man, all these people are taking Spirit of the Alpha and using it on themselves and
Yeah.
don't quite understand why.
I probably just had no idea. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming, yeah, I guess they would have an idea, but yeah. Um,
I just thought that just stood out to me as extremely
Funny.
funny. Like the only reason we supported the Spirit of the Alpha at all is because you can swap runes. There's some shenanigans you can do to swap runes. The fact that you've taken off the Way of the Earth rune doesn't doesn't remove the buff or remove your ability to use the Earthshock taunt immediately. You keep them for about 10 seconds. So we were starting to see people who were like, well, shamanistic range is way better.
Yeah.
So, and I don't need Way of the Earth. So I will start the fight by swapping from Way of the Earth to shamanistic rage, cast my Earthshock taunt to get marked as having the rune on, and then use Spirit of the Alpha to maintain threat for the rest of it. And also get shamanistic rage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
The weird stuff classic people do. Ugh.
classic, man.
Yeah. SOD, tons of changes. I mean, I think those are, we just kind of highlighted too, but like in these notes, like Rogue gets a bunch, Druid's getting a ton, more on the healing side, I think, and a little bit on the Moonkin side. So, yeah, they seem to be putting a lot of effort into SOD, trying to at least balance it, tune it up a little bit. So,
yeah.
But cool. I think then before we get into sort of like the progression stuff we've hinted at, there's one other final thing, which is Blizzard did do a blue post on the basically discussing the bad luck protection for Fyr'alath. How do you say this?
Fyr'alath. It's the
Fyr'alath.
opposite. Like Fyr'alath is Fyr'alath. This is not. This is Fyr'alath.
Fyr'alath, which is the legendary axe, weapon axe. So they basically put out a post that said they are essentially increasing the bad luck protection that is granted by the greater and lesser essences or embers, sorry, that you basically receive for killing Fyr'alath and not getting a drop or killing some of the earlier bosses. And so based on this change, I think the biggest thing to come out of that is that Wowhead actually noticed from a data mining perspective that they believe they may have uncovered the actual drop chance percentage of the legendary, which again, this is all data mined, not really backed up by any sort of specific blue post. But essentially what they came out to, there's a post about this, a bunch of percentages everywhere, but I think for people to understand, essentially they say like, if you kill heroic Fyr'alath every week, or sorry, if you kill a heroic Fyr'alath, you have to kill Fyr'alath 13 times before you are guaranteed the axe to drop. So
it's like
on heroic,
you kill it 13 times on heroic, and then the 14th time you're guaranteed to get it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And then similarly, Mythic has a same bad luck protection. Mythic though is 5 kills, and then on the 6th kill, you're guaranteed to get it, based on the data mining. Which, again, I think the old version of this, this is to be believed, like on heroic, you only ever got a 30% drop chance. That's the highest it ever was.
Yeah. And that's
Mythic eventually
30% at week 40, like kill number 40, right?
Yeah. Which is
that's
just wild.
That's 10 months. This tier is not going on for 10 months.
And this, I think, so the reason I put this in here is because I think the numbers are interesting if you're a numbers person. But to me, the bigger issue with this is I hate this legendary system.
Oh, yeah.
I think like this type of single drop legendary system, it's the same reason I hated or I dislike the old god, like the Thunder Fury legendary system.
Where you just had to hope to get a binding to drop.
Exactly, which is why I think the like the rogue daggers, like Shadowmourn, like those systems, so rogue daggers from Cataclysm, Shadowmourn from Wrath, right? I think those systems where you collect a bunch of items are, in my mind, much better. Like I think there's still the chance like you go multiple boss kills without getting a shard or whatever, without getting the item you need, but there's typically like weekly some sort of progress, right? Some sort of like weekly progress.
It would have been better if those greater embers were actually just like when you get, let's say
10 of them,
10 of them,
whatever,
right? You can then get the axe. Like you're going to get it, which is more or less where we're at now. But it's like, okay, if it were when you get 10 of them, you're guaranteed to get it, and Mythic always drops 2, and Heroic is like guaranteed to drop 1 with a chance for a second. Some of it's like 20, right? When you get 20 of them, you're guaranteed to get it. Heroic always drops 1. Chance to drop 2. Normal always drops, or has a chance to drop 1. Like, and LFR has a low chance to drop 1, right? But honestly, like, I don't even feel the need to be like, our LFR players can't have, like, give LFR players the fucking legendary.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I think it's what like from my point of view, I think this whole Greater Ember thing just it would be better served, to your point, if it's an actual UI thing you can see.
Yeah.
Like this sort of hiding the percent chance to me just doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. Like, and I'm a very much I think I've said this multiple times in this podcast. I'm a huge fan of numbers going up.
Yeah.
So like you give me a UI element where I can visually see the number go up, and I am more inclined to like that system, even if the actual
Yeah.
end result is the same as this system, right?
Yeah.
Like in my mind, it's always like, okay, like I am making progress. If I don't get one this week, like if I'm an LFR only person, it's like a 25% chance to drop one of these things. I need 10 of them. It's like, okay, well, I missed out this week, but maybe I'll get one next week. And then when I get that
Yeah.
10th one, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Even if it takes me the same amount of time if I like didn't get to see the
Yeah.
actual item or whatever.
There's also
So,
one of the things about these RNG systems is that on average they work out, but there's always the people that are not getting the average, the people that get lucky and get it right away, which is fine,
mhm.
and the people that get very unlucky and potentially never get it despite many, like, I guess in this case, if their old numbers are correct, you would be guaranteed to get it after 10 mythic.
Mhm.
um
That's still, we're 14 weeks into the tier as I like, that's what, like, and we killed
yeah,
it. So like we killed it right around this time. That means another what,
2
3
months.
months, 2 months, yeah, of
Yeah.
kills before you get it, but guaranteed to get it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think in my mind, yeah, I don't like this hidden sort of percentage piece of it. I don't like the pass fail nature of it. The like single drop get legendary versus not.
Yeah.
Because to your point,
Yeah.
like the only thing you see on the outside is like, oh, such and such got the axe this week and I didn't, right? Which
Yes.
means now this sucks. There's no like build up towards, okay, like we funnel things to one person, they get all the items they need, they get the axe, and then we funnel to the next person, which is
Yeah.
to me, like in my mind, like I don't know. It just
I would hate to have to manage that as
I think
someone that
I
runs a
think
raid and has to deal with loot. That would suck. Don't do that. Just give it push personal. Everybody gets it. Just nope. I don't want to deal with it.
I agree. I mean, I think the people management side of that type of system, I think, is much more difficult than this. So maybe that's why they do it. But in my mind, I think it just I don't know. This whole like hidden drop chance stuff is just yeah, it just doesn't. I don't
Yeah.
like it. So
I'm on board with it. I think there are very few people that look at this and are like, that's fun. I want that.
yeah,
This
or
isn't
like I get like this is the like this is the best way to do it, right? Like
yeah.
it's I don't think it is. I think there's definitely better ways
Yeah,
to approach.
this isn't like Diablo or PoE or Last Epoch or anything like that, where like you can just you get so many items and it's okay. Like you'll
Yeah,
eventually get it. You don't need it. Um, it's not the same. It's not the same.
yeah. I will say though, like the one thing, and I guess so to a lesser extent, I actually experienced this like with the pass fail piece of a drop, not in the legendary case, but like
Yeah,
with my hunter in Wrath, like basically about a month ago, I got needed everything I could get from the heroic bosses we were killing, not Lich King, but everything else. But one belt off of like Festergut or Rotface, one of
yeah,
the Plague Wing bosses. And I would literally be excited about the raid up until we killed that boss.
and
And
then
then
you're done.
like then I don't care because it either
Yeah,
dropped or it didn't. And like I feel like that's a lot of like the way that like if I would needed if I played a warrior or whatever
yeah,
DPS like melee DPS class, so one of this, like I would feel the same way every time we killed heroic Fyr'alath each week.
yeah.
Right? It's just like
And
great, now this week sucks.
that's what would happen both with this and with the Evoker Legendary last year. Is we would go,
Yeah.
everybody would log on, we do heroic, we would kill the boss, and it wouldn't drop, and people would just instantly log off.
Yeah. Well, even like in our raid, like we ran heroic as sort of a thing every week where we are doing Fyr'alath mythic progression, and like it would suck when we'd like someone's alt would come in and get it
Oh
over like
yeah,
our main warrior, and just I'd be
yeah.
like, shit hype, that sucks, dude. Like, yeah, and like
We
we
had that
had
happen
literally multiple
multiple
times.
times.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is like great. Like our like Argo got the axe, I think 1 week over hype, and I don't think he's completed it yet. So
Yeah, well, that's because Prot Warrior is an inferior tank that can't use it.
that's
You
true.
can
That
quote
is
me on
true.
that.
I agree. I hate that he won't play another tank class. Every tier progression.
Uh,
But cool, yeah. But that's on so they released all the or not released, but based on the data mining, it seems like we have the numbers for it. So if you're waiting for the axe, kill heroic Fyr'alath 14 times, and you're guaranteed to get it.
yeah, but
Um,
you mentioned Fire Act progression. I'll
yes,
talk progression strat, and I'll let you
sure.
introduce this because this was your idea to talk about this.
Yeah, so I think I wanted to talk a little bit about just between us, like strategies going into progression, because what I noticed, right, is that our guilds are fairly similar in terms of progression, in terms like where we're at, right? And how we progress and when we kill bosses and things like that. So what I noticed, which was very interesting, was while the time it takes for us to kill bosses is relatively the same, the number of pulls, at least for the last, we'll say 3 bosses of this tier, is wildly different. Like
Yeah.
orders of magnitude different, which in my mind just sort of lent to. So that was the first thing I noticed. The second thing was I actually watched your raid on Friday before you killed it, which I don't think we mentioned, but you killed
Yeah.
Fyr'alath, so
Fyr'alath's dead.
congratulations. But what I noticed was just like the speed at which you pulled in between wipes is even faster than we do, which is I think just an interesting thing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like from a progression point of view, is it better just to get reps through it? Or is it better to basically each time you wipe, talk about, okay, what happened? Right.
Yeah.
Even if it's only for like 30 seconds, but spend that, like, take that sort of like half breath and then get back into it versus like everybody dies as people are still rezzing, you need to be eating and like the pull timer starts and like then you're
Yeah.
going like
We're
less
not
than 30
that
seconds
fast,
later.
but like, yeah. The so there's been an evolution for us in how we handle this. We
Mhm.
used to be a lot more like every poll taking time talking about it, often taking too long, right? Like five,
Yeah.
10 minutes between polls sometimes when you're not actually taking a break. And
Hmm.
most people are just standing around and you have 2 or 3 people having an extended conversation about, over analyzing something that happened that pool, to be honest.
Right.
It's just that's what would happen. And that wasn't the greatest. And we started doing more of like, trying to pull faster.
Hmm.
But there's definitely where like the point we're at now is for most of the time we'll maybe touch about Tindril in a minute, but like most of the time, if there's nothing to talk about, right? Like if it's
Yeah.
just like somebody needed to dodge and there's nothing really to talk about them needing to dodge, there's no like positioning thing that they messed up that caused them to have a harder time, or nobody baited something wrong or dropped a puddle in the wrong spot, you know then we're not going to sit there and like try and have a conversation about something that
Yeah.
didn't matter. So our once we hit that point, our like between pulls kind of thing is we wipe it up, we res up, drop a feast, hit ready check, and when everybody hits ready, then pull timer
Full
starts.
timer.
And it's just like that's how we go. But there's we have warriors and preservation evoker have cooldowns that don't reset when you reset the boss. So there's a bunch of actually like 45 to a minute between pulls where we gotta wait for stasis, or we gotta wait for I don't know what the war is, but like we wait for their cooldown.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And I think for us, like the biggest difference is even when we're at that point, like even when we're at that point of Fyr'alath, there is still like there's a beat that we take. I don't know how to describe it, but
Yeah,
it's
we take a
not.
breath.
Yeah, yeah. There is that piece, and I think even then we will still. Maybe that's the difference in our raid, and I noticed this actually is like well, except for one time your raid leader got a little angry at someone
A
messing
little
something
bit
up.
a little bit angry, yes.
Yeah, I think you probably know the specific point. Like it
Oh
was a
yeah.
couple pulls right before the kill.
Yeah.
But I think in general, like we have a very like our raid leader's pretty direct, right? In terms of like when you mess up, like he
Yeah.
wants to hear you say that you messed up. And
And
that's sort of I think the thing that takes a little bit of time for us is that like there's
yeah.
that we want to hear like as a raid, or at least from a cultural perspective, like we want to hear that feedback loop that you messed up.
Yeah.
And so even if it's just like, hey, position wrong, or hey, I thought I was L3 red but I was really L4 red and I counted wrong, like
Yeah.
even though that's like a very straightforward reason to wipe, like there's an expectation that as a person in the raid you say that out loud.
Yeah.
um
We're somewhere in the middle with that because we want to make sure we know, and that the person
mhm,
knows, if they messed up, they should know that they messed up, and ideally, you know, that's what happens.
yeah,
Um, but we also like we had a couple back-to-back pulls on Friday where people just died to frontals in phase one, right?
yeah,
And we're not going to sit there and like make them say that, oh, I ate a frontal in phase one. Like
yeah,
we call a wipe, and literally as people are running off the platform, I'm sitting there, I've got the details like death list pulled up. I don't have the damage meter or the healing meter pulled up during
yeah.
combat. I just have deaths. So like literally as people are running off, I'm just mousing over those and it's like, okay, blaze plus frontal, frontal plus frontal. That's it. We know what
Yeah.
happens. But there are things like when Shadow Cage stuff, especially, was a big one on Friday. When that
Hmm.
kind of thing happens, like we do like need to know, like, okay, why did that get missed? What happens that you didn't get the Shadow Cage breaks, or that you didn't get in position for Shadow Cage, right?
Hmm.
Like what went wrong? We actually, like, we had part of the reason. Well, not that much of a reason that we had trouble with Shadow Cages. We had to swap healers because
Gotcha.
our healer priest was out on Friday.
Oh no.
So we brought a second preservation evoker in. So we had one on the stasis build and one on the blossom build. But anyway, they were not familiar with how little time they have to get to the stack markers when they get shadow cages. So there were a couple of like, okay, they were too slow, they didn't get there, and in one
Hmm.
case they got saved. Like one of the extra people with the molten eruption got them out, which was great. And in another one of
Gotcha.
them, they actually clipped the person that was supposed to break their marker, so the person didn't get to break either.
Oh no. Yeah.
And that's like, it's not the person's fault that had the molten eruption that they got stunned there. Like this evoker just hovers on top of them and then they get stunned.
Yeah, coming from this, yeah, flying
Yep.
in from the side.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's oh sorry.
but yeah, like it kind of, I think for us it kind of depends. We do want to make sure people know what they did wrong, but also like sometimes, like I've tried in the past to have it always be like them acknowledging that they got it wrong, but there's a little
Hmm.
bit of like a mental boom that can happen where like trying to, especially when somebody has it happen multiple times in a row, the
Oh
kind of
yeah.
thing where like,
Those are
I ate a fire beam, yeah, I ate a fire beam again, yeah, I ate a fire beam again, kind of deal, and people can kind of get tilted from having that, and like if you know what happens, you know what happens.
yeah, no, I will say that that is to me like for me personally, every progression fight there is a night or like a string of probably like 10 pulls where I will do that, where I will be the one that makes like the same silly mistake over and
Yeah,
over again. And like I will at least like for and maybe that's the difference. Like for me personally, like I already know I screwed up. I don't want to mic up and say I screwed up,
yeah,
but like
and
I'll type
we have people like that, and we've had
yeah.
conversations with specific people.
Yeah.
It can cause problems sometimes where like we don't call out certain people too much because like we know they've been in the guild for like half a
Yeah, there's
decade
like yeah.
and we know. But then some of the like somebody new comes in, they're like, well, they've made as many mistakes, and it's like, yes, we've been through this with them multiple times in the past. You haven't had that history yet.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there is that does happen even for us, but yeah, no, I think it was just it was really interesting to see like the pull speed you guys did. I did have one question. So you said you made a mistake on Tindril
Oh yeah.
progression, like your
All
night
right.
one. So like what happened there?
Let's talk before we talk about that. Let's put
Okay.
some numbers in
Okay,
context for
yeah. Yeah.
people. So I've got prog stats and Warcraft logs pulled up for both our guilds, and so this is Anomaly's guild, decidedly uncouth. You guys killed
Hell yeah.
Fyr'alath last week, and so the numbers I want to highlight: Smolderon, Tintril, and Fyr'alath pull counts and kill times. You went
Hmm.
84 pulls, 321 pulls, and 271 pulls, right? If we go to occasional excellence, we went 154 polls, 507 polls, and 366 polls. Now, Smolderon took us twice as many polls as you guys, and
Yeah.
also took us twice as much time. Um, Smolderon did not go great for us. Tindril took us like 6 hours longer. We went from 20, you guys had about 24 hours on it, we had about 30.
Hmm.
But we did what is that, like 40% more pulls.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
A
lot more
lot.
pulls. And then on Fyrak, you guys again 271 pulls to our 366, but we actually spent less time on Fyrak, which is what prompted this conversation, I think.
Yeah.
Like you guys spent about
Was it
29
20?
hours and we spent about 26. But we had like almost 100 more pulls.
Which is for a boss like Fire, that's a lot of pulls. It's a lot of additional pulls.
Yeah. Um yeah. And I mean, I think some of that is like whether you wipe in phase one or phase two, phase three. And
Right.
once we started getting to phase two, like we were like phase two is not really our problem on Fyr'alath.
Yeah.
So there's an element of that, but like Tindril specifically. So you know how I mentioned that like normally we're like way more talky earlier in prog. We'll
Mhm.
wipe, we'll talk about what happened, we'll talk about what the positioning things are that'll make that easier, all that stuff, even when it's something simple like eating a fire beam.
Mhm.
Okay, early on there's often things you can talk about to be like, okay, where is it safe for me to stand that's going to make it easier for me to like dodge fire beams.
Right.
We didn't do that on Tindril. Like everybody, if you go and you read people talking about progressing this fight, there's a lot of talk about chain pulling this fight because you just have to get through phase one. Phase one
Right.
is such a rough check. You just have to get reps on it and you have to get through it. And so full disclosure, I'm not our raid lead. I don't
Yeah.
normally run like the moment to moment operations within a raid night. I do a lot of our like spreadsheets and stuff,
Mhm.
um, and help with calls, but I'm not the raid lead. Um, our raid lead was out the first night of Tindril, and I was just having a fucking chain pull. We did 93 pulls
So
in the
many in a night,
first night
dude.
of Tindril. That is 93 pulls in 4 hours,
That's
25
wild.
pulls an hour almost. It was insanity. People hated it, and it actually like the damage that did. There, like obviously we didn't take the time to have those conversations about
Mhm.
what you could do that would make it easier, what we could do to make like routes fly faster and safer and things like that. And there were actually pretty far-reaching repercussions for this, which is part of why it took us so long to kill this boss.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's things like, okay, the fact that we weren't really taking the time to talk, people kind of checked out. Like
Yep.
within that
That's
raid night, people kind of checked out. But then it went beyond that. People had such a shit time on that like our mental on that fight for like the next 2 weeks was just like in the gutter, in
oh
large
yeah.
part because of like that raid night. Just like people hated it. They didn't want to show up and like do that again, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that was I will say, sorry, just one
oh yeah,
point. That was the same issue we had, I'll say. Like after the first night was just a ton of people were like, I never want to see this boss again.
yeah,
Like I just yeah, already over it, which is
yeah.
wild for like a night one of progression.
Oh
So
yeah,
for us.
a night one progression on a long boss.
Yeah.
Um, but there's also things like I was looking through one of the things we actually had, like we had a lot of trouble with fire beams and with root cleaves. I looked through a bunch of
Mhm.
other guilds progression on this fight, and we had like triple the number of deaths from people cleaving roots.
Oh wow.
It was a common thing, and I do, looking back at it, I do think that part of the issue is that we spent this time early in Prague spinning our wheels, not taking time to talk through our issues, not taking time to talk about like how are we gonna get people in for the root AoE without fucking murdering each other,
Yeah.
and then like genuinely just like the next 2 weeks we're basically recovering from that terrible raid night, and we never really got through that,
Yeah.
right? Like it got easier because they nerfed the amount of damage the roots did, so it happened less often for us, but it was still a problem up until we killed the boss.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for us, like the biggest thing that we did, it was like after the first night, there was a very noticeable thing that said like if we can make because the biggest issue with the fight, even post nerf, is the second roots in
Yeah,
P1. Like that's where in like the pre nerf version, it's you have four fire beams, so like two casts of it go off. And just dodging and positioning yourself in a way where you can kill roots and also not get hit by those beams
yeah.
is very difficult. So a lot of teams will basically use every type of like freedom, basically any
Immune,
type of root
anything like
break you
that.
can
Yeah,
for that second roots. And so when we were going through that, like after that first night, like everyone in our raid, at least I can't say for everyone, but all of the healers that could go gnome went gnome because it was such a frustrating experience that like without being
mm-hmm.
prompted, like it was like I went gnome, our priest, actually only two of us went it because we only have a priest and a monk. Our paladin, I don't think monks can be or gnomes can be
Gnomes can't be
paladins.
paladin.
Yeah, but they have a thing, and then our evoker was getting a freedom anyway already. So no, and a couple other people went gnome in the raid just because we
Yeah,
needed like making that part simpler made the rest of the fight for us better. And so it was
yeah.
very much like a specific case in our raid group that like we went and did that. And then yeah, I played Tiger's Lust. Like I actually cast it on somebody other than myself for like the
Yeah.
first time in years.
And that's one of the things that also went wrong with like that first night. We did not have a comp that could freedom every on that.
Yeah.
And so there's tech that Northern Sky used where you can have your Havoc Demon Hunters hit Netherwalk if they're gonna get hit by a beam and
Hmm.
just sit in their route. And so that's what our plan was for that night. And honestly, it's just really hard.
Yeah, I mean
Not the
that.
active hitting Netherwalk is not really hard. Doing that and then also not dying to the ads living too long. Because when on Mythic, if you break your roots, you spawn a Treant. The Treant pulses AoE damage. It's a big frame rate killer as well, which is another fun problem that people love dealing with.
Yeah.
Um, but when you have 18 Treants up or 17, and the Demon Hunter sitting there with Netherwalk, and like they're one of our big AoE damage for that set, they have to balance like doing their AoE damage with not getting murdered by a beam.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was the one thing that at least we knew about going in was like that was going to be our strat was going to freedom as much as we can and
Yeah,
basically layer healing cooldowns there because
yeah,
like people were going to die.
yeah,
And so like that was the big adjustment we made from night one to night two was like people went gnome. We adjusted some healing cooldowns. So we had like I think a rally in AM at that point. And that really helped sort of clean up that phase for us. But no, I think that was the other kind of I guess raid progression thing that we started doing this tier that I don't know if you guys did, but we
race changes.
we well race changes was one, but then also raid plans was a big thing for
Oh
us that
yeah,
we typically
you
don't
should
do
see our
this where
Sarkarath raid plan.
yeah, so we never did it. Like I don't I mean, we might have done it for Sarkarath and like maybe limited for
Yeah,
Rasigath, but before this expansion, like we very rarely used raid plans. And like
yeah,
now, like for Fyr'alath specifically, we had a phase one raid plan, and that's all we saw. So
yeah,
like do phase one, get to
yeah,
phase two consistently, like 2-3 times. Then we get to see the phase two raid plan. And it was basically like 8 slides of like, here's your movement across like the various portions of the
yeah.
fight.
That's
Um,
we didn't do that for Tindril, and I think that is one of the areas that we messed up by not doing that. Like we tried to adapt
mhm.
other people's raid plans and not really change them, and
Yeah.
we really needed to sit down and like make our own based on them instead. And there's the reason I say that is not because I think we'd make a better one, but because the act of like making your own forces you to understand it.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like see your name. Like so we use
Yeah,
names for everything. So
and
like you see your
that's
name in the position, not just some icon. So
I can like, we have these in our sheet for P2 and P3, where we have on the like CCs we have everybody like icon, the name, the
mhm.
description, what you're doing, and in P3 where your seed is, it's your name for the one you're picking up and your name for where you're dropping it. But then
Yeah.
there's like we were hitting P3 around the point that they nerfed Fyr'alath HP, and we were like, well, we probably don't have to do the fourth. We ended up doing the fourth seed because we had one of our raiders dead for almost all of P2 and P3 because they got hit by Shadow Cage and didn't get out.
Nice.
Um,
Nice.
it was the most tragic thing. They were almost in it, and like they just weren't quite stacked. And like from the VOD, it looks like they're gonna hit both, and they just don't.
That's awful. Yeah.
But
It's
yeah,
rough.
we did the fourth seed and then rested them and killed it after. But anyway, taking the time to go through the raid plan, like I've been discussing with the raid lead, like here's how we're gonna do the seed drops, and we were gonna do something different.
Hmm.
And I went through making the raid plan. And I was like, wait a second, this thing we were talking about is not going to work because of how we
Yeah.
actually have to move to the open space after each one. We were going to like flip the L around that people usually do. And if we
Yeah.
do that, we're going to have this super dangerous thing really early on for no reason.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So we did that. That taught us here. Here's why you do it the way everybody else is doing this. And we took that and we modified it. Like we'd used way more space under the expectation that we weren't doing the fourth seed.
Hmm.
And then so like we used like virtually the whole platform on the first three seeds.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah. No, that was. I mean, for us, I think that helped immensely. Like those raid plans. Yeah. The same idea of like you can sort of see the movement before you do it. Because like to be fair, like I'll be honest with you, like I watch the world first guilds kill these bosses. I don't watch like the Dratnos like
Yeah.
guide after the fact. Like
There's okay.
we just don't do that anymore. Like it's
Yeah.
just, yeah.
There's a sizable um some of those are not as helpful as you might think they are. So I'm going to
Yeah.
highlight a specific one. In Vault of the Incarnates, the raid lead from Consequence put out a video about Razageth. It was very detailed. It was like CD planning and all this stuff. And
Mm.
one of the things in it that seems like a good idea on the surface was CD planning to min-max your shield duration in Phase 2 of Razageth.
Okay.
Razageth AFKs if you break her shield early. She just sits there and auto attacks the tank.
Mm-hmm.
There is no reason to min max those. And it actually cost us a lot of times because we went in and we're like, okay, well, this is like a thing that we got from this
Gotcha.
pretty high rated guild. We're gonna take this strat of like trying to min max these, and that cost us time. We had a bunch where we were trying to min max it. We were like taking damage off of shields, and then we would miss a shield break and just instantly wipe. But
Yeah.
then we switched to just like send it, just break the shield. Because effectively, at the end of the day, it's just boss HP. You have to
Yeah,
break
it's the same
this many
thing.
shields, unless you're skipping one, which we were not on progression.
No.
It's just boss HP. So there's no reason to hold stuff off of it. So yeah.
That's yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, yeah, it was just interesting, like the time thing around this whole topic
Yeah.
of like it's just the different progress strategies. I think yeah, every guild does it slightly differently, and I think for us, like I said, like it's a lot of like number one, like the whole accountability, not account, because I think every guild has accountability, but like the
Yeah.
call outs for why you're dying is like very to me it's polarizing because I to be fair, if you were to ask me in any other guild, I probably would hate it,
Yeah.
right? Because like the other aspect of this guild is there are a player or two in my guild that also likes to answer for you. Maybe not in the nicest way. So there's a little bit of frustration, I'll say,
Yeah.
that people might feel if you're new and you don't understand the culture a little bit, or like just the mentality.
Yep.
Which yeah, to your point, I think that's maybe the one downside of the way we do it. But I think secondarily for us, the biggest change has been not only like the raid plans, but also the like you mentioned the thing about someone dying, and like a lot of times early in progression, like the response to someone dying, particularly to maybe like a frontal, if they don't think they got hit by it, was like, oh, I just didn't get healed. And like that's
Oh
the
yeah,
only
we
reason we
banned
take.
we
Yeah, so that was the I think that we need to start doing that in my guild because like that's the biggest response I'll get. Like we'll get, and I'll look at the death log and be like, you ate two frontals. Like, what do you mean you didn't get healed? Like, what do you,
yeah.
or you ate a frontal right before the huge AoE
We
at the
we more or
whatever.
less banned like I bled out
Yeah,
as a valid answer that you can give because
yeah,
we had exactly that same problem. There are times like we swapped a healer on Friday because we had to,
mhm,
and we did actually have people bleed out. But that's because we swapped a healer and we knew that was going to happen. That's part of just the course of
yeah,
things. But
just
like
yeah,
we have not had an issue with people like actually bleeding out from just regular damage. The only times it's happened has been like something but like Smolderon, right?
yeah,
We let 3 orbs go in, somebody bleeds out. The issue is not the healers. The issue is that we let 3 orbs go into the boss and he's doing 21% more damage.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the probably the other reason it takes us a little bit longer to pull is that I will look at death logs and I people will be like, I don't know how I died or like I bled out. And I'll be like, no, you didn't. Like, go look at your death log. Like,
Yeah.
this is what happened.
Yeah.
Or yeah, or we get the whole like, yeah. Anyway, we don't have
Yeah.
to get into that part of it. It's sort of over the conversation. But no, I mean, I think no, I think in general, like it's just interesting the way like guilds approach progression because I think like there's merit to like just getting reps in, and there are certain bosses and certain progression nights where we'll just get reps in.
Yeah.
But to be fair, it's never like it was such a big difference. You
Yeah.
mentioned Tindril being the biggest difference. To me, it was actually the Fyr'alath difference that I thought was wild
So
because it was
I'm looking at this again now. And
because like 100 more pulls, like only 3 more
so
hours, which is just
there's if you look at I'm gonna pull this up on the stream too. If you look at Friday, February 9th on prog stats, it's got the pull
Mhm.
count right. This is the same pull count that we have on Warcraft logs. Friday, February 9th is blank on the chart. And I'm
Yep.
betting there's some like fucked up timestamp in that log,
Oh, gotcha.
potentially breaking the amount of time. So maybe this conversation was spawned by a programming error. It could also be that it's got the total time for that right. I'd have to go through and add up the nights manually
Yeah.
to
Is that for us or for you guys?
for us.
Okay.
So it could potentially cut out like a night at Prague, which would be about 3 hours, which is would
Yeah.
put us at a similar amount of time as you guys had.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, still 100 more pulls.
Yeah, which is like, yeah, that's what sort of spawned it. Because like, yeah, we had killed it very similarly. So, um, but okay,
Yeah.
it's always interesting. The whole progression ideas, the way guilds approach it. So
Yeah, and like we've changed and evolved how we do things so much over the years. It's barely like if we looked at how we did things in like Sanctum, it's completely different.
oh, not us. Like ours is still the exact like that's the thing about like from a leadership perspective and like the fact that like our healing like I've been a part of the healing core for so long and like
Mhm.
our raid leaders have been there for so long, like our approach to almost every fight. That's why the raid plans are I'm calling them out because this is the first tier that I remember us doing them like for specific phases of a
Yeah.
fight, right?
Yeah.
So that's like a brand new thing for us.
We
We
had
typically don't do that.
we had pretty big detailed ones for like the jailer and for Sarkareth. Like we did we were one of the first people to do the no down strat on Sarkareth. It was us, Peonies Guild, if you recognize that name,
Mm-hmm.
was I think the actual first team to do it, but they killed it like the week before we killed it, right? So we we were working on that at the same time as other people, like figuring out how this strat works.
Yeah.
So we had our own raid plans for that one for sure.
Nice. Awesome. Well, cool.
Uh,
I think that's everything. I have one final point that doesn't really involve this, but I did kill Heroic Lich King on Friday
hey,
or on Wednesday,
rats!
I mean. Dude, last pull of the night, it was great. Our DK died to a shadow trap in phase one, and we still
That's how
killed
it
it.
goes.
So yeah, we 24 man Heroic Lich King. But no, got it
Uh,
down. So that was exciting. I'm now done for Wrath, we'll say. So I'm a winner. So double progression bosses down. We're
hey,
having a good week or
one
two.
of them a little
So
bit harder than the other, we'll say,
it's slightly
just slightly.
with yeah,
But
slightly.
yeah, that is going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for watching and or listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you do enjoy it and you want to support it and the other work that we do over on the Patreon, you can do that over at or on the website. Now I've completely messed up the outro. You can support PikaSerenity.com over at patreon.com/PikaSerenity. And of course, come join the Discord. Best place to come hang out, talk tech for bosses and progression, and to bully Anomaly for the fact that he's swapping off of Mistweaver.
It's a brave new world out there. Maybe we talk about that more next week.
Yeah. But yeah, that's going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.